Chapter 1. He was at Penn Station when his cell buzzed. His next pickup from a nightclub, 2 blocks away. He drove through the night traffic, weaving in and out, till he approached the throng outside the nightclub and caught one of the bouncer's eyes. The bouncer bobbed his head and shouted at someone inside. 3 women came tottering out, high heels, short skirts, painted lips, mascaraed eyes. He got out and held the door open for them, caught the alcohol breath of the blonde as she eyed him. "Isn't he a looker?" she drawled. One of her friends laughed. The other, who seemed to be more sober, gave him an apologetic look. "Come on, Jen, get in. Let's get you home." He closed the door when they were seated and got inside. "The Bronx, ma'am?" He eyed the sober one in the mirror. "Yes." She gave him an address. "They might puke. I'll give you as much warning as I can," she added, and made another apologetic face. "I've seen worse, ma'am." 11 p.m. in New York was still busy. Night revelers and shoppers, theater-goers and office workers. He drove carefully, his eyes moving ceaselessly, assessing. It was an ingrained habit, acquired from another lifetime. The women didn't offer any trouble, and thankfully none of them puked. He dropped them off at their address, an apartment building that seemed to have had its best years, and drove away. He went to Central Park, circled a few times, and found a vacant space. He went to a South Korean food stall that was open till late and ordered his usual rice and fish. The cook didn't blink when he spoke in Korean. The customer was a regular. The driver took his box, went to a bench, and ate slowly. There was no hurry. He had nowhere to get to. No one to meet. The night was his. Trouble came when he was washing down his food with water from a plastic bottle. He had wandered back to his bench, which was now in deep shadow. The Korean was packing up for the day, his pots and pans clanging in the night as he scrubbed them and put them away. The driver heard the swish of skateboards before he saw them. 4 of them, riding casually, totally at ease on their wheels, as if the boards were part of their bodies. They swirled around the stall, laughing, wisecracking, and slowed to a stop. Hispanic-looking, but he couldn't be sure. One of them, a dark-haired man, went to the counter and placed his order. The Korean got busy, and while he was serving rice on paper plates, 3 of the boarders swung behind him. One of them, a large man with a brown beard, grabbed him suddenly and lifted him easily. The Korean was startled initially, and then surprise gave way to anger. "Let me go!" he yelled. Beard laughed and turned him away from the stall. 2 of his friends slid open drawers and removed a wad of cash, as dark hair rested an elbow on the aluminum counter and kept a watch. The street was empty of traffic. The driver was in darkness and wasn't visible. It was an easy heist, except that the skateboarders were unmasked, their faces exposed. They planned to kill the cook? The Korean was wriggling, trying to kick out, attempting to set himself free, shouting as loudly as he could. However, Beard had him, in a vice-like grip, his enormous strength subduing his captive. Beard was whispering something in the Korean's ear when the driver made his move. "Let him go." Dark hair turned. "Where did you come from?" he asked the driver, a bemused expression on his face. His eyes flicked beyond the driver. No one else on the pavement. A cab cruised past, its occupants disinterested in the happenings. "Let him go," the driver repeated, no inflection in his voice. 2 of the boarders drifted away and came behind the driver. "How about minding your own business?" The Korean heaved desperately and groaned when Beard chopped him again. The driver didn't move. The aluminum was bright, well-maintained, and gleamed in the night. In its reflection, he could see the 2 men approach him stealthily. One of them removed something from a pocket and was raising it when he exploded into action. He hopped back, A full step, his left leg stretched out behind him, straight and strong. It crashed like a wooden pole in the attacker's belly. The assailant collapsed like a punctured balloon. The driver didn't stop moving. He swiveled on his heel, his left leg rising till it came to shoulder height and smashed into the second skateboarder. One step forward, another, ducking beneath Dark Hair's outstretched arms, grabbing him by the collar and kneeing him in the groin. Dark Hair was fast, very fast. He swung his hips just in time and took the blow on his thigh. He grunted nevertheless and slowed. That gave the driver his opening. His knife-edged palm whipped into Dark Hair's throat and felled him. 3 steps around the stall to face Beard, who had flung away the Korean and was reaching underneath his jacket. The driver lunged forward and grasped Beard's wrist. He spun on his heel, tightened his hold, and using the larger man's momentum, threw him over his head. Beard's body whirled in an arc and landed on the stall. The stall teetered on its wheels and landed on its side with a crash that would have woken the neighborhood, if anyone was listening. "Watch out!" The driver turned and swayed back, just in time as Dark Hair's knife sailed past his neck. He caught the moving arm and broke it. Dark Hair screamed. He threw himself at the driver and rained blows at him with his left hand. He grabbed hold of a pan and bashed the driver's head. The driver brought his arms up to ward off the blows. He tried to roll away, but he was jammed against the stall. No space. He brought his legs up and kicked out at Dark Hair, who stumbled to his feet, took one last look, grabbed his board, and fled. The driver rose, alert to further attacks, and saw the remaining 3 men hobble away, clutching their skateboards. He was readying to give chase when the Korean stopped him. "Let them go," the Korean joined him, rubbing his neck tenderly. "It isn't the first time I have been mugged." "What about your money?" The Korean waved the roll of money in the air. "He dropped it when you kicked him." "You know them?" "No." "They might return some other night." "What? You won't be around to protect me?" The Korean grinned and wiped sweat off his forehead. He bowed deeply and thanked the driver in his native tongue. "I'll take my chances," he told the driver. "This is my city. No punk's going to run me off." "Report it to the cops." "No, I'll take my chances. This isn't my first gig. For the cops, this is small beer. They won't invest any effort in it." The Korean was right. Budgets were tight, they always were, and the cops would focus on larger crimes. He looked back at the hoodlums who were now distant specks and made his mind up quickly. Dark Hair split up with his friends and took the subway at 57th Street. The subway station was busy with late shift workers, and the driver had no problem in keeping his distance from his target. The R-line rolled up, gleaming steel and glass on wheels, and Dark Hair entered a compartment, the driver following. The driver sat 7 seats across from his target, not paying him any attention. Dark Hair wasn't looking at anyone. He was favoring his right hand, holding it gingerly, and had his head down, a baseball cap low over his head, his eyes closed. He grimaced occasionally, and his lips moved, as if he was cursing. The train went south, to Lower Manhattan, and thence to Brooklyn. Dark Hair didn't get off at any stop in Manhattan. He stirred at Rector Street but didn't rise. At Borough Hall, he yawned and got unsteadily to his feet and exited. The driver followed, using a bunch of tourists as cover. Dark Hair didn't look back. He walked as swiftly as his injuries allowed, past the Historical Society, turned right at the light, walked another block, and up to the door of an apartment building on J Street. He entered a code on the keypad with his left hand, pushed the door open, and disappeared inside. The driver remained in the shadows, watching the building for a long while. Life possibly became more difficult for the Korean. He knew who occupied the apartments in the building. The building's tenants were cops. Chapter 2. The driver returned to his small apartment in the Bronx, parked the cab in the shared parking space, and walked up 4 flights of stairs. The building had elevators, and while old, they were serviceable. However, he always took the stairs, fewer people on them. The driver liked his solitariness. There was the young woman on the floor below, an architect who was into fitness, and she used the stairs too. She nodded at him whenever he passed, but they had never conversed. The driver wasn't seeking friends or companions. He knew every occupant in his building. He knew where they worked, how much they earned, and who they hung out with. It was standard tradecraft for him. He locked his door, made himself a cup of tea, and drew up his screen. He went to a secure website that only a handful of people in the country had access to. He entered Darkhair's address, and after a few seconds, a list of names appeared on the screen, the building's occupants. He started researching every occupant, and after his 3rd cup, he got the name he was looking for. Chad Saunders, 28 years old, worked in a courier company in Upper Manhattan during the day, hangs out with thugs in the evening. No wife. Lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in that building. The driver looked away for a moment, thinking, that building is for police officers and their families. The NYPD struck a deal with its landlord and negotiated below-market rents. How's Saunders living there? He searched for the name Saunders, and his fingers stilled when his computer made the correlation. Trevor Saunders, captain of the Midtown North Precinct. One son, Chad Saunders. The captain lived in another apartment in Brooklyn, several blocks away. Alone, his wife had passed away a few years earlier. The driver dug deeper. The cop owned his apartment, one that he had inherited from his folks. The apartment on J Street where his son lived was leased in the cop's name. He's provided for his son. He brought up the bank accounts for the cop, regular salary from the city, a monthly mortgage charge, no unusual expenses, no rent paid by his son. Chad Saunders' bank account had no strange transactions either. He withdrew cash every week and didn't seem to have a credit card. Was the attack on the Korean a one-off? It wasn't. Chad Saunders had been arrested before, once for drunk driving. He had been fined and gotten points on his license. He had been arrested twice more. On both occasions he had been part of a gang that mugged and robbed. On each occasion, he hadn't been convicted. His lawyer had argued that he was merely hanging out with the gang and was not an accomplice. The other gang members confirmed that Statement and Saunders had been let off. Did his father wield any influence? The driver thought about it. It was possible. Trevor Saunders looked like he was a reputable cop, good track record, well respected by his peers, and good standing in the community. His son is an embarrassment? The driver got no further in his investigation and shut down his screen to sleep. He was back in his usual spot the next night, in the shadows on the bench, watching the food stall. The Korean didn't know he was present as he went about his business. The cook didn't seem any worse off for the wear. He greeted his customers cheerfully, pocketed their money. Only the driver could see the baseball bat tucked discreetly beneath the serving counter. Chad Saunders made no appearance that night, and neither did his fellow boarders. A week passed, and when the cop's son didn't show up, the driver put the incident behind him. It was another typical night in Manhattan when he got the pickup message. A fare to be collected from the Rollicking Pig, a nightclub near Madison Square Garden. 11 p.m. Friday night, revelry was in full swing. He slid in behind a line of cabs and private vehicles as he approached the entrance of the club and watched women in high heels and men in evening suits. Some of them appeared drunk, many were sober, all of them seemed to be in high spirits. His fare, a woman, bent down. He lowered the window. She looked at the plastic badge dangling off his mirror, at him, and then at her phone. Washington Heights? Yes, ma'am. That's me. You're Laura? Yeah. Hold up a minute. She straightened and went to the door, and presently returned with a red-haired woman. The second woman was clearly drunk. She was unsteady on her feet, and Laura had to support her as she helped her friend to the cab. The driver got out of his vehicle and held the door open for them. He smelled alcohol and vomit, perspiration, and something else that was familiar, but he couldn't put a name to it. He watched the women in his mirror as he drove out slowly and joined traffic. Red Hair was crying. Tears streaked down her cheeks and caught the streetlights. Laura was whispering to her. Not soothing. Laura's furious. A red light came up and he stopped, and over the sound of traffic he could hear them. Why did you go with him? Red Hair shook her head. I don't remember. I told you. It's blank for me. My head hurts. I told you to go slow. Drink less. Red Hair turned away and stared out of the window. You were not yourself when I found you near the bathroom. Where did he go? I couldn't see him anywhere. I don't know. I told you. It's all blank to me. I only remember going with him, and then nothing. Laura gasped and whispered in her friend's ear. Red Hair turned, her face whitening visibly, even in the dim light. Excuse me? Yes, ma'am? The driver met Laura's eyes in the mirror. My friend. She needs to go to a bathroom. Urgently. She tried to make her voice strong, but he could detect the tremble in it. They were near Central Park. He knew several hotels there which had bathrooms in the lobby. Sure, ma'am. There's one just off the next light. Won't take more than 10 minutes. She can hold off till then? Red Hair nodded. They emerged from the hotel half an hour later, and the driver could immediately sense something was wrong. Laura's face was stiff as a board, her skin stretched and paper-thin. Red Hair had her head down and seemed to be trembling. The driver got out and held the door open. This time, he got no thanks. Given their demeanor, he wasn't expecting it. We're still going to Washington Heights, ma'am? He asked Laura. She looked at Red Hair for a long moment, her lips pursed. Red Hair nodded without meeting her eyes. Yeah, Laura replied reluctantly. He drove. Traffic was light and he made good time. He was crossing Hamilton Heights when he heard whispering again. You should go to the cops. You can't let this go unreported. Do you have his number? Anything for him? Red Hair didn't reply. Her friend shook her shoulder savagely. I'll be with you. You. Have. To. Report. This. You. Have. To. Confront. Him. She spat the words out. Red Hair flinched and moved away. I'll think about it. In the morning. It'll be too late by then. Red Hair's lips compressed mutinously. She looked away from her friend. At least get yourself tested. Promise me that much. Red Hair nodded reluctantly when Laura fixed her with a steely-eyed gaze. I'll come around in the morning. We'll go together. But it'll be too late to go to the cops. Why don't you listen to me? Red Hair kept silent. Laura sighed and ran her eyes through her wheat-colored hair. She met the driver's eyes fleetingly and looked away. Neither of his passengers spoke until they arrived at the address, a white-walled apartment building. Can you wait? I'll see her up, and you can take me to my place, Laura asked him. Yes, ma'am. She returned 15 minutes later, and he could see she was raging. Probably argued with her friend. She gave him an address near Yankee Stadium. He set off, watching her in the mirror occasionally. Her hands clenched and unclenched. She brought out her cell and toyed with it, but didn't make any calls or send any messages. He was waiting at yet another light when he heard the sound of weeping. You're okay, ma'am? She nodded, sniffled, and apologized. She wiped her face and dried her eyes with a paper towel and tossed it in her bag. My friend, she spoke suddenly, loudly, she's been raped. and she started sobbing. Chapter 3. The driver wasn't surprised. The moment he heard Red Hair say she had blanked out, he had suspected the worst. His job gave him the opportunity to observe people. Cab drivers were invisible. People acted as if they didn't exist and let down their hair on the rear seat. He had drunks throw up in his cab, brawls break out, lovers make out, drug smugglers carry briefcases of cash. He had seen the worst in people. He had also seen a lot of good. He slowed and found a parking space and eased into it. "She told you who the rapist was?" He turned towards her when he had stopped. Laura shook her head. "We were at the bar with other friends. A bunch of men approached us. I went dancing. She was talking to 2, maybe 3 of them. I danced for a long time. Had dinner. She didn't join. She was still with the men. I returned. Didn't find her anywhere. Found her near the bathroom, lost, totally out of it." She swallowed and stopped talking. Her hands twisted her dress and stilled them when she saw him observing. "Where were the rest of your friends?" "There were 4 of us. Bella, that's her, and 2 others. Those 2 hooked up with 2 men and left." "You knew those men?" "I didn't. Bella said she knew 2 of them." "How many men were there?" 5. 2 in their group. Went with my girlfriends." "Would you recognize them?" "I think so. I'm not sure." "Your friend. Why does she want to keep it quiet?" "What's it to you?" She flared suddenly. "You're just a cab driver. Take me home, please." "Yes, ma'am." It was close to 1 a.m. by the time he returned to his apartment. He boiled water and broke open a packet of noodles. He washed a carrot and munched on it as his late-night dinner heated. Once ready, he ladled the contents onto a paper plate and went to the window and sat on its sill. He had chosen the apartment deliberately for its view. It looked down on the street and gave him a bird's-eye view of life as it passed far down below. He mulled over the evening's events. Times have changed, he thought. Bella should report her rape to the cops. There had been one time he had been forced to pacify an aggressive boyfriend in the back of his cab. He had kept pawing at his date and, despite repeated no's from her, had kept his hands on her. He had stopped the cab and had threatened to call the police, at which the boyfriend had cursed him. The man had stepped out, and when the driver got out, had swung a punch at him. The driver had ducked easily and had smashed the man's head against the roof. The girlfriend had then turned round on him and had accused him of assault. It had been messy, and thankfully it hadn't been reported to the cops. Not my problem. He dumped the plate in a trash bag, and when he was rising, the sound of laughter came from far below. He stood on his toes and peered out of the kitchen window. A woman chasing a young boy, both of them laughing. The boy turned back and flung himself in Mum's arms. He stood watching in the stillness of his apartment, and a thought came unbidden. Maybe I should just sniff around the club and try to see who was responsible. After all, what can the perpetrator do to me? I'm alone. No one to worry about me. I hadn't been always alone. There had been... He plunged a finger in the remaining boiling water, and the scalding heat wiped away memory. He logged off work at 6 p.m. the next day, came back to his apartment, changed into a pair of jeans and a tee. He flagged a cab, the irony not lost on him, and went to the club. It was Saturday night. The club's dance floor was already filled with partygoers. Most of them were young. A few older people were at the back, seated around dining tables. The driver didn't have a plan. I'm here to get a feel for the place. He made his way to the bar, grabbed an empty stool, and ordered a soda. "With what, sir?" the bartender asked him. "Nothing, just the soda." The bartender kept an expressionless face, thrust a glass at him, and filled it with his drink. "You sure that won't make you high?" a blond man sniggered. "Dunno," the driver replied. I haven't tried it before. How about you? Blonde looked at him strangely and left. The driver swiveled on his seat and faced the dance floor. There were about 50 people on it, many women, some men. He watched for another hour, his eyes flicking over the club, and when a dining table emptied, hustled across and had a quick dinner. It was 9 p.m. by the time he returned to the bar. Now the club was bursting to its seams. The throb of heavy beats rattled bottles and glasses on the bar. He watched a young woman dance with her friends. She reminded him of Laura. He squinted to get a better look. Nope, not her. A group of men crowded through the floor and came to the women. They started dancing suggestively, and when one of them got too close, the women started peeling off and came to the bar. One lone woman remained, her eyes closed, oblivious to the fact that her friends had deserted her. Two of the male dancers surrounded her, close enough for her to feel their body heat. Her eyes flew open, and she snapped a few words at them. One of the men slunk away, but the other man laughed and came closer to her. He thrust his pelvis at her and made contact with her thigh. The driver pulled out his phone and captured the men on his camera, alert for any sign of physical violence. He watched as the woman dancer he named her shouted furiously at her harasser and stormed off to join her friends. The women came close to him and he hitched to the side to give them space. Dancer gave him a grateful smile and spoke earnestly to her companions. They turned to watch the dance floor as one, and the driver felt the woman stiffen when pelvis approached them. The man swaggered as if he was God's gift to womankind. He had a wispy beard and eyes that flicked across the women. A permanent sneer seemed to be his go-to expression. "Can I get you ladies anything?" None of the women replied. "Ladies, a drink?" "Leave us alone, please," Dancer replied. Pelvis's smile faded. "You don't fancy my company?" "No, I didn't fancy it over there, and definitely not here." Pelvis was joined by his friends, who attempted to draw him away. He shrugged off their hands and came a step closer. "They want to be left alone," the driver spoke, his eyes on the dance floor. "Huh?" "The ladies," the driver explained in a bored tone. "They don't want you." "Brad, come on, man. Let's go." A buddy grabbed Pelvis by the arm. Brad threw off his friend's arm and glared at the driver. "Who asked you to butt in? Who asked you to hassle them?" "Brad, let's go. The bouncers are watching," the friend hissed urgently. He made an apologetic face to the driver and the women and led his protesting friend away. "Can we buy you a drink?" Dancer smiled at the driver. "I don't drink, ma'am, but thanks." He emptied his soda and slid off his stool. He knew what would happen and had no intention of delaying events. Chapter 4. Brad and two of his friends were waiting for the driver at the exit. There was a long line of clubbers waiting to be admitted. The three men had used the crowd as cover and were trying to be inconspicuous. The driver spotted them quickly. Brad's expression gave him away. He was the only person outside the club who didn't look excited. The driver made a show of putting on his jacket while he looked around casually. Brad shrank behind a couple when the driver's eyes flicked in his direction. "They'll follow me and get me when I am alone." The driver was willing to oblige them. He knew the neighborhood well. There's that street, 10 minutes away, whose lights don't work well. There's always a line of parked vehicles. He turned up the collar of his jacket and stepped down to street level. A cab halted in front of him and two women stepped out. Its door slammed shut, and for a fleeting moment he caught sight of Brad in its window's reflection. The man was hurrying to follow the driver, his friends close behind him. The driver jammed his hands in his pockets and set off briskly. He waited at a set of lights and spotted his pursuers in a storefront's reflection. He got off the curb, crossed the street, and approached his target street. He turned into it and, ducking immediately, ran down the line of vehicles and crossed the street. Brad pounded around the corner at a run and drew up suddenly. "Where is he?" the driver heard him whisper. "I'm here." The driver stepped out in the middle of the street. "You!" Brad swore and rushed at the driver, who waited until the last moment before making his move. He dropped to his knees, took the full force of Brad's run on his shoulder, and using the attacker's momentum, threw him over his shoulder. He got to his feet swiftly, just in time, as the two friends approached, circling him cautiously. "This isn't your fight," the driver told them. They didn't heed his warning. The driver stepped forward to meet one man, threw a right hook, and as the friend was taking evasive action, kneed him in the groin. The friend screeched in agony, but before he could fall, the driver grabbed his shoulder, heaved him around, and flung him at the second friend. Both men went down in a heap. Brad had risen, however, and was on the attack. Brad's fists swung. The driver ducked, trapped a clenched hand, twisted it, and broke Brad's elbow. The attacker howled. The yell gave way to a loud groan when the driver smashed Brad's face in the side of a vehicle. "Did you rape that woman yesterday?" The driver crouched over Brad, whose face was bleeding and his nose appeared to be broken. The fallen man looked dazed and didn't respond immediately. The driver jabbed a palm against his nose and Brad screamed. "I asked you a question," the driver asked him, his eyes leaving the attacker to rest on the two friends who had risen and were hobbling towards him. "I didn't rape no woman, man," Brad sobbed. "Where were you yesterday?" "What kind of question is that?" Another twist of his palm elicited another moan. The friends were 10 feet away now, their eyes burning in anger. "Where were you yesterday evening?" "At work. I swear. Let me go. You're killing me." "Where do you work?" 8 feet. "In an advertising agency." The driver punched Brad and felt for his wallet. He removed it, pocketed it, and rose. "You want to end up like Brad?" he asked the friends. Friend 1, whom he had kneed, looked at Friend 2. They stopped coming. "Make your mind up quickly," the driver told them impatiently. "I don't have all night. The first one who comes forward gets a broken knee." Friends 1 and 2 didn't like that. Not one bit. They seemed to have the same thought because they turned on their heels and slunk away. "Your friends? They're not very supportive, are they?" He knelt beside the crying Brad and removed the wallet. Brad Crenshaw, that was the name printed on several business cards in the fallen man's wallet. There was an address and a telephone number. The driver snapped a picture of the card and tossed the wallet on the attacker's chest. "If you're lying about the rape—" "I'm not." Brad rolled on his side and clutched his belly, his face contorted in pain. "Harassing women in nightclubs is your thing?" A soft moan was the only reply the driver got. The driver washed his hands in warm water back at his apartment, and after drying them, pulled out his screen. He typed the advertising agency's name and researched it. A mid-size firm that worked with corporates of all kinds. It had pictures of its smiling staff, and at the bottom was Brad Crenshaw's. The face on the website matched the man he had felled. How do I confirm with Laura that he wasn't the rapist? He slept over the problem, and when he awoke the next day, he had his answer. The answer was on his cell phone, a message from his booking company. Laura Solznick had contacted the firm and wanted the driver's details. "Pass them on," he messaged back. He met Laura Solznick in a midtown coffee shop. He had clocked off for the meeting, and while he waited for her to arrive, ran through all that he knew of her and her friend. He had checked them out the night he had encountered them. Solznick and Bella Elledge both worked in the same office, a realtor in midtown Manhattan, its office a block away from where he was sitting. Both of them were in client servicing. That meant they took prospective buyers to apartments and homes. Both were from New York State and were high school friends. A stroke of luck had gotten them working at the same firm after college. From their social media profiles, he knew they dated casually, lived alone in their tiny apartments, and had no serious boyfriends. He stood when Solzhenitsyn arrived. She was wearing a white suit. Dark shades covered her eyes, and she gave him an automatic smile when he gripped her hand. She removed her shades and shook her hair, her eyes darting around. The cafe had been her recommendation, probably a place she frequents. He watched her as she settled and placed her order when the server arrived. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. She's nervous. Probably never met a cab driver in a social situation. "My pleasure. How's your friend?" Her eyes darkened and her fingers toyed with the cutlery on the table. "That's why I wanted to meet. She and I had a big argument yesterday. She refused to go to the cops, said she couldn't prove anything. She had showered by then. You know?" Her face colored. "Yes, ma'am." She doesn't remember anything. She said it would be her word against the man's. "How well does she know the men?" She knew the one who raped her, met him at the same bar, knew him casually, not as if they went on dates or anything like that. She drank her juice in one gulp when it arrived, swallowed, and slid her eyes away from his. "There's more," he thought. "I went to the cops yesterday, reported it. They listened, took details, but said they couldn't do much unless Bella came forward. She went nuclear when I told her. Left early." "Where's she now?" "She didn't come to work today. She isn't answering her phone." "What do you want me to do, ma'am?" She played with the napkin. "I thought you could come with me to the cops, confirm what you saw." "I didn't see anything, ma'am, just the two of you getting into my cab." Her eyes flared, and she stood up suddenly. "You men, you stand up for one another, don't you? You probably approve of that rapist. Tell me, Mr. Driver, how many women have you molested in your cab?" He didn't reply. He sat watching the light play in her brown hair, the way her green eyes flashed. "I have never raised a hand to a lady, ma'am. Neither have I assaulted anyone." "Whatever!" She stormed off furiously. The driver dropped several bills on the table and rushed out to catch up with her. "Ma'am," he stopped her by her arm. She glared at him and then at his hand on her forearm. He dropped it quickly and pulled out his cell phone. "Recognize any of these men?" He played the video from the nightclub. The anger faded from her eyes as she looked at the clip, at him, and back at the phone. "No, our men were different. How did you get this clip?" "Wait." She snapped her fingers in excitement when he hesitated. "You went to the club, didn't you? I knew it." "Knew what, ma'am?" "That you wouldn't let it go." Chapter 5. "How do you know that, ma'am?" "You remind me of my brother. He served in the army, some special forces kind of guy, went to Iraq, Syria, several such places. He has the same stillness about him. He wouldn't have let it go either. In fact, if I tell him what happened, he'll come hunting. Loaded for bear." "So?" she asked him impatiently. He quirked an eyebrow. "Did you go to the club?" "That clip's from the club. I recognize the dance floor. You've got a timestamp on the clip. Yesterday." "I was there, ma'am." "You don't look like the clubbing type to me." "I'm not." "So you went to check it out. See anything? That club's got a reputation for bad behavior. It's been reported several times to the cops, but it still keeps its license." "And the two of you still went there?" "It's convenient for us. We can drop in after work." She shrugged. "What do you intend to do now?" "Nothing, ma'am. If your friend refuses to press charges, there's nothing anyone can do." "And that monster goes free to rape other women. He must have used some drug on her." The driver didn't reply. He didn't know Solzhenitsyn. Even if he did, he wouldn't tell her. That wasn't how he worked. "Let me know how it goes with your friend," he told her. "If she's still my friend," she replied morosely and stared as he spun on his heel. "Wait, you're leaving? Just like that?" "What did you expect, Mom? I drive a cab. I have to earn a living. If she goes to the cops, I'll be happy to come forward as a witness. You know how to contact me." Her eyes bored into his, and a half-smile played on her lips. "Just like my brother?" And with that, she disappeared into the crowd. The driver walked several blocks, pondering on his problem. He was going to take a hand. That wasn't up for debate anymore. How would he identify the rapist, however? The answer, when it came to him, was so obvious that he smacked a palm on his forehead and mumbled an apology when a passing woman stared at him and hurried away. He looked at the security camera attached to a streetlight. Need to visit the club again. He returned to the club in the evening, wearing casual clothes, trying to look as if he was out to have a good time. Closed spaces, loud thumping music, crowds of jostling people, and lots of alcohol wasn't his idea of entertainment, but he accepted he wasn't like most people. He didn't go to the bar this time. He visited the men's bathroom and, while washing his hands, looked around. No cameras inside. Not that he expected any. Outside the men's and women's bathrooms were 2 cameras, pointing at their doors. There were 2 at the entrance as well. The bar had more cameras, and there were several aimed at the dance floor from different angles. There should be private rooms. Where else would he rape Bella? "Is there like a function room or a private room I can hire for a party?" he yelled at the bartender, who pointed upwards. The driver glanced up and saw a balcony that he hadn't paid much attention to. The balcony looked out on the dance floor, and several people leaned against a glass, waist-level partition, drinks in their hands. "VIP area, private rooms are up there, speak to the manager." The driver thanked him and went in search of the route to the upper level. It was a discreetly concealed staircase next to the entrance. Makes sense. VIPs can slip upstairs without going through the main areas of the club. He hung around until the entrance opened and an elderly bunch appeared. One of the bouncers checked their credentials and opened the door to the stairs. The driver rushed forward once the bouncer left, jammed his foot against the closing door, and slipped inside. The noise level immediately fell away. No one came rushing after him, and no voices rose in surprise or alarm. The stairs were covered in thick carpet, and when he went to the upper floor, there was more carpet and couches tastefully strewn around. There were dining tables lit with dim lamps, and servers moving around with trays of food and drink. The driver strode as if belonged to a set of doors. The private rooms were beyond it. One large room that could accommodate 30 people, and 3 smaller rooms for parties of 10. The rooms didn't have cameras, but there were enough of them at the entrances. He brought out his phone, and when no one was paying any attention to him, shot a video clip of one of the cameras. Back at his apartment, he enlarged the video clip and read the brand inscribed on it. He grunted in satisfaction. A common enough brand that he recognized. He knew it was used with several off-the-shelf security systems that he could hack into. The driver used a proxy server in Eastern Europe and brought up a dark internet website that Joe Public wasn't aware of, and entered a forum. He contacted a hacker, and in another hour, after a big sum of cash had moved out of his account to the hackers, he was inside the club's system. He had half an hour, the hacker warned him, before the club was alerted about an intruder. Half an hour was enough. The driver found the camera's video files neatly stored in a folder. He copied the entire contents of the folder that seemed to have a month's feed on it and logged out. Then began the job of watching the videos. It was 2 a.m. when he found what he was looking for, and it stunned him. "We need to meet," he told Laura Solznick the next day. "Hold." He heard her voice muffled as she spoke to someone, and then she came back again. "Why are you calling me at my office?" You need to see what I've got. What is it? I can't tell you over the phone. Now you're scaring me. Her voice was hushed. That's the idea. They met in a downtown hotel lobby during her lunch hour after he insisted that they be nowhere near her office. The hotel had low lighting and catered to upscale clients. She knew it well, and when he looked at her questioningly, she shrugged. I meet clients here. Some of them stay here when visiting the city. She glanced at her watch impatiently. What do you have? What's with this cloak and dagger stuff? Watch the third clip. He gave her his cell phone. She watched, and her face went pale. Yeah, that's him. Those are the men we were dancing with. Now watch the next clip. The next clip showed Bella accompany 3 men to the VIP area. Now, the 5th. In that clip, she was entering one of the private rooms with the men. The door closed behind them, and there, the clip ended. My God, she was raped by more than one man. That's not what you should be worried about, the driver told her. Bella looked at him uncomprehendingly. One of those men is Chad Saunders. The name didn't mean anything to her. His father is a captain in the NYPD, Chapter 6. She sat in shocked silence, her face going pale. He signaled to a server and ordered 2 coffees, and when they arrived, she drained hers quickly, even though it was hot. That man, Saunders, he's the one she was seeing occasionally. He tried to sleep with her previously. She turned him down. She stared in the distance and then finally turned to him. How did you get that? He didn't reply. What do we do now? What do you want to do? We should go to the cops. With what? With those clips. That should prove what I reported to them, she snapped back angrily. Ma'am, those clips prove nothing. All they show is your friend entering a room with some men. They could be joining a party, anything. You said your friend has... There's no evidence of a rape, ma'am. So we just sit here? Heads turned at her raised voice. No, ma'am. You go to your friend, break the news to her and get her to change her mind. Laura Solznick laughed scornfully. She wasn't ready to go to the cops then. You think she'll go now? You have to try, ma'am. Can you think of any other option? Yeah, we go to the cops. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. You show them those clips. They have my statement. They have to do something. Sure, they'll do something. They'll arrest me. She looked at him in shock and then licked her lips, shrinking instinctively. Why? Are you wanted? No, ma'am. But that evidence wasn't acquired legally. He could see the anger gathering in her eyes, her face darkening, and when she rose abruptly, he wasn't surprised. All you can do is give excuses. Text me those clips. I'll handle this myself. And with that, she stormed off before he could say a word. His lips quirked for a moment as he watched her depart, stiff-backed. He settled the check and left more discreetly. Maybe Chad Saunders will confess, if I ask him nicely. He went to where his cab was parked, turned the light on, and went about his business until evening. Saunders's courier company was on Broadway in Washington Heights. The driver parked his cab in a vacant spot in a side street, fed the meter, and went to the gray-colored concrete building. There was a security guard at the door who looked at him but didn't stop him. A concierge directed him to the 10th floor. He took the elevator along with several other office-goers, and when he stepped out, he was right inside the courier company's reception area. Chad Saunders, ma'am, he told the woman behind the desk, as she cradled a phone between her shoulder and cheek. He isn't here, she told him, and went back to her call. Where can I find him? Wait up, she told the caller and covered the mouthpiece with a hand. Chad didn't come in today. Hasn't been in for a few days. Can I help you? He put on a disappointed face. We were planning to go to a bar. He didn't return my calls. Figured I'd meet him here. He called in sick. Has been absent for... Hey, Todd, she called out to a passing co-worker. When was Chad last in? 3 days back. 3 days back, the receptionist repeated helpfully. Thank you, ma'am. He returned to his cab and pondered his options. He's been missing ever since he raped her. He called the NYPD and was told they couldn't reveal the whereabouts of their captains to strangers. I'm not a stranger, ma'am, he told her. Captain Trevor Saunders is my dad. I lost my cell, which had his number. Oh, a pause. He heard keys click. Your name is? Chad Saunders, ma'am. Only son of the captain. The suspicion in her voice dimmed, but not by much, and the captain's birthday is. He gave her the date, and her resistance disappeared. She put him through to the captain's office. The phone rang several times until it was picked up by an officer. The captain's in a meeting. Anything I can help you with? He hung up. He wasn't worried they could trace his number. He was using a burner phone. So, the captain's at work. He and his son haven't gone on a camping trip. He drove back to his apartment and emerged at 8 p.m. It was time to meet Chad Saunders in his apartment. He figured the rapist would lie low for a while after the event. He wouldn't go clubbing or holding up food stalls. 9 p.m. was a reasonable time for him to be home. He reached Saunders' building in Brooklyn and marched to the door. He pulled a ball cap low over his face and pressed the buzzer to his target apartment. It rang and continued to ring, without any reply. Chad Saunders had his apartment on the 6th floor, facing the street. He stepped back, looked up, and counted the stories. 6 apartments on each floor had a street view. 4 of those on the 6th floor had their lights turned on. He buzzed every apartment on the 6th floor till he got no replies from 2 of them, 603 and 608. The first one was his target apartment. He tried the delivery man trick, randomly buzzing apartments, saying he had a delivery, but no one fell for it. The entrance door remained stubbornly shut. It's a cop building. It wouldn't work here. He went back to the sidewalk and hung around inconspicuously, waiting for another resident to arrive. One did. An elderly woman. She had a shopping bag in hand, and when he hustled behind her as she reached the door, she turned around with sharp eyes. You live here? No, ma'am. I'm Chad's friend. He's on the 6th floor. Call him on his cell. She frowned at him and went inside quickly, shutting the door in his face. That too didn't work. Time for more extreme measures. He returned to his cab, which was parked a distance away, and drove it in front of the building. He doused all its lights and stretched out for a nap. He woke at 1 a.m. The streets were deserted except for an occasional passing vehicle. No pedestrians or dog walkers. That was good. He unlocked the trunk and withdrew what looked like a shotgun. From a paper box he removed a shell, jacked it inside the weapon, and went to the front of the building. There was a line of windows that ran from top to bottom of the building, just to the right of the door. Windows in the hallways on each story. He looked around carefully. No one visible. No headlights anywhere. He went back to his cab, crouched behind it, and took aim at the 6th story's hallway window. He fired with a sound that was no louder than a vehicle's backfire. The projectile shot out of the weapon and shattered through the window. 5 minutes later, thick smoke emerged from the broken window. Another minute later, the building's fire alarm started shrieking. Chapter 7. The driver wasn't taking any chances. He quickly fired another smoke bomb through the 5th-story window and a 3rd one through the 7 stories. By then, the building had lit up, and he could hear muffled shouts and raised voices coming from inside. He went to the door and hid behind a large bush. Just in time, as the door opened and a stream of residents flooded out. Many of them disheveled, some of them in their pajamas, but all of them wore expressions of panic. "Gather at the front, people." He came out from behind the bush and joined the outpouring. He injected authority into his voice and held the gazes of several people who looked at him. "Over there," he pointed to the sidewalk in front of the small gate. "I've called the fire department. They should be here soon." People didn't question authority, even cops, especially when woken up from deep sleep. The crowd went obediently and gathered where he pointed. "Sir," he asked an elderly man, a retired cop from his looks, "can you keep them calm? I need to go inside and check the building is empty." The cop swelled with importance. "Sure thing, son. But the building's on fire. It's dangerous." "I'll be careful, sir. There's no way of knowing if all residents have come out." There were over 200 people bunched outside, and he had a feeling every tenant had evacuated. However, he wasn't going to let go of the opportunity. He slipped inside the building quickly before anyone questioned him. The alarms were blaring continually inside, and smoke was filling the lower floors as he took the stairs rapidly. The 6th floor's hallway was thick with a grey fog, reducing visibility to just a couple of feet. He fashioned a bandana out of a strip of cloth from a pocket and tied it across his face, leaving just his eyes visible. There was no light under 603's door. Nevertheless, he knocked. "Anyone home?" he yelled. There was no reply. He donned rubber gloves and from another pocket brought out a lockpicker's toolkit. The door took 5 minutes to open, and he shut it behind him as soon as he entered. The apartment was dark, but he had enough illumination from a shaded flashlight to guide him. Living room, a TV, a couch, a center table, a dining table. Hallway that led to the kitchen and bathroom. Further down was the main bedroom and a smaller one after it. It looked like Chad Saunders used the smaller room as a study. There was a wooden desk on which was a laptop, a tray filled with papers, a chair. A games console was in a corner. He opened the laptop, and a password window opened up. He snuck a glance out of the window. The crowd outside had thickened, and he could see people from the neighboring buildings coming out. He thought he heard the sound of sirens in the distance. He returned to the laptop and inserted a USB drive. It came with an inbuilt program that copied a hard drive's contents. It glowed green, which meant it was working. He riffled around the desk, turning over papers, bills, credit card receipts, bank statements. He snapped pictures with his cell and cocked his head. The sirens were growing closer. The flash drive was still green. He searched for a clue to Chad Saunders' presence, but didn't find any. The rapist didn't have a landline phone and didn't seem to have any other cell phone. The first fire engine arrived, and men leapt off it as the USB turned blue. He yanked it out and dislodged several sheets of paper. They floated to ground, and when he bent to pick them up, one caught his attention. It was a bill from Chad Saunders' cell phone provider. He grabbed at it and fled the apartment. He went past the elevator doors to the end of the hallway, which had a window facing a backyard. He smashed the window with an elbow and knocked away shards of glass. There was a drain pipe 3 feet away. He could hear voices below and the sounds of pounding feet. The racket outside had grown, and the sounds of several engines were audible. Thinking time was over. It was time to act. He squeezed his body out of the window, balanced himself for a second, and leapt. Cold air slapped his face for a second. In the next moment, his outstretched palm curved around the pipe. His body slammed against the wall as he got purchase with his left hand around the circular tube. It creaked, and his blood went cold. The ground was a fair way down. However, the pipe held. He slid down using both hands to slow his descent. "Hey!" a voice called out from above, a fireman peering through the shattered window. "I'm checking if this can be used as a fire escape." He landed, looked up to see two more heads looking down, turned and fled. He climbed several walls and fences and circled backyards till he joined a street where he removed the makeshift bandana. The Maps application on his cell guided him back to the cops' building. He walked confidently and merged in the crowd. No fire. False alarm. Stranger. He heard snatches of conversation. He went to his cab, in front of which was a fire engine, and turned on its light. "I am happy to drive anyone wherever they want to go. No charge, folks." Just because he had emptied an entire building and broken into an apartment didn't mean he couldn't play the Good Samaritan. No one took him up on his offer, though several thanked him. He backed off and drove away. He had barely progressed 100 yards when he saw the first cruiser pull up outside the building. He wasn't worried about his cab being traced. He had fitted false license plates before heading to Saunders's building. He didn't go far from the building. He stopped a block away and retrieved his backpack from the rear. He removed his laptop from it, logged into another darknet site, surfing on a free Wi-Fi signal. He typed in Chad Saunders's cell number. The website would locate the phone, and once he knew that, he would consider his options. The wireless connection was poor, and the website didn't respond. He placed the laptop in the passenger seat and drove out, looking for a coffee shop. He passed a red light when his cell rang. Solznik, he frowned. It was 3 a.m. How come she's awake so late? He thumbed his cell and held it to his ear. "Yeah?" "He called me, just now, woke me up," she burst out, panic in her voice. "Who, Mum?" "Chad Saunders. He threatened me for reporting him to the cops. He swore at me and said he would deal with me. I am scared." "Call the cops, Mum." "Oh, yeah? You know who his daddy is?" He floored the pedal and surged into the night. She lived on West 190th Street in Washington Heights. An hour away, maybe 40 minutes if he encountered no traffic and went through red lights. "Are you alone, ma'am?" "Yes. I live alone." "You have no friends?" "Girlfriends. They won't be able to help me. I tried Bella's number. She isn't answering." "How did he sound?" "Cold. Angry. He was outside. I could hear traffic in the background." He glanced at the laptop. No success yet, and he looked ahead. Tail lights in the distance. No other vehicle nearby as he approached a cross street. He blew through the lights just as they turned red. "I called my brother. He too isn't picking up. Probably sleeping." "What do you see outside? Where do your windows face?" "The street. I'm on the 4th floor." He heard her move in her apartment. No vehicles outside. "He's calling again." Her voice rose. "Take the call. See what he says. Can your phone record?" "Yes." "Record it. Call me back when you're done." He tossed his cell away and focused on the street ahead. He willed out the surroundings and imagined he was in a tunnel, just him alone in the night. His cab responded to his touches. It would. Beneath its hood was a souped-up engine that he serviced regularly. He merged onto FDR Drive, his tires slapping on concrete. He pulled past another cab, its driver gawking at his speed. And then he was away. She called 5 minutes later, and he could sense she was struggling to control herself. He said, "I will not see daylight. He'll find me even if I run. Lock your door. Barricade it with chairs, tables, anything you have. Don't open it until I arrive. Hurry, please." "Yes, ma'am." She kept calling him every 10 minutes, checking on his progress. He took Harlem River Drive, 15 minutes away now. He joined Dickman Street when she suddenly hung up. He tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. He turned off his headlights and entered her street. He parked several buildings away and proceeded on foot. A car was parked right outside her apartment building. He placed a palm on its hood. It was warm. He ran to the entrance and buzzed her apartment. 5 men just arrived. I saw them from the window." Her voice broke in a half-sob. "I don't know what to do." "Let me in." The elevator's light was climbing up when he entered and crossed the second floor even as he watched. He took the stairs. He ran 10 miles every day and finished with a punishing martial arts routine. Running up the steps wasn't a problem, and his breathing was steady when he reached the 4th floor. He cracked open the door to the hallway and peered out. Her apartment was the furthest away from where he was, in the corner where the hallway ended. He saw shadows move in the dim light, 5 men striding to her door, unarmed as far as he could see, all of them of average height, in the standard attire for thugs, jackets, tees, and jeans. He entered the hallway, moving noiselessly, coming up from behind them. He whistled a tune, and when they whirled, he nodded at them pleasantly. "Evening, folks." Chapter 8. He approached them confidently, like any resident would. He looked them in their eyes briefly, not holding their gazes. A resident would glance curiously and look away, which is what he did. He could sense the uncertainty in them. They had come to deal with a woman. Here was this man, late at night, going to the same door they were headed to. He came close to them, and after the slightest hesitation, they parted. 3 men were bearded, 2 weren't. All of them were dark-haired. He went to Solznik's door and raised a hand to knock on it. The door had an old-fashioned brass handle, and in its reflection he could see one man in the center, gesture. 3 men peeled away and rushed at him. He didn't turn immediately. He stood facing the door, his raised hand bunching into a fist. The sound of running footsteps was audible now, as was the heavy breathing of the running men. He waited a beat. Another, and then, when they were almost on top of him, he whirled round, simultaneously dropping to his knees. The man at the front lost his balance when his swinging fist met thin air. The driver grabbed him by the belt, pulled him forward, and smashed him into the door. The sound of the impact reverberated through the hallway, but the driver wasn't stopping to admire the acoustic effects. The second man hit him on the shoulder, which was a mistake because he should have been protecting his groin. The driver punched him in his nether regions and hurled him in the direction of the third man, who fell to the floor. Something clicked. A 4th man had produced a knife. He came lean and low, the blade catching the light. The door opened behind the driver, and he heard Solznik squawk in surprise and fear at the sight. "Shut it! Get back!" he ordered, ramming an elbow in the face of one of the 3 men who was recovering. Knife Man thrust at him, straight, going for his throat. The neck was a narrow part of the body. It was easy to duck away. The attacker turned when the driver evaded and slashed sideways. The driver realized his mistake when a pair of hands grabbed him from behind and squeezed him. "Got him!" the 5th man yelled triumphantly, and Knife Man rushed in. The driver didn't try to escape his captor. He was focused on the blade that was coming straight at his chest. Knife Man was 3 feet away, his mouth split into a snarl when the driver acted. He launched into a high kick with both feet, throwing his full weight on his captor. 5th man wasn't expecting that move. He grunted in surprise, and his hold slipped. Knife Man stopped his forward movement desperately, leaning away but not fast enough. The driver's right heel ripped open his cheek. Simultaneously, 5th man stumbled and released his grip. The driver fell. He jabbed his right palm to the floor, used it as a pivot to rotate his body, and kicked out Knife Man's legs from underneath it. He completed a full turn and knuckle-punched 5th man in the soft of his thighs. He rose in one fluent motion, head-butted 3rd man, who had been rising. He followed it up by dislocating the assailant's shoulder, glimpsed the gun in the man's waist, and drew it. "That's enough," he commanded at the 5 men who were in various states of agony. First, Man didn't heed him and came charging. The driver fired into his thigh, and with that, the fight ended. The cops arrived 15 minutes later, called by other residents of the building. The driver had been aware of heads emerging from various apartments and several shocked screams during the fight. His assailants had kept him busy, however, and there was no time to reassure the tenants. The police cuffed him as well, which didn't surprise him. As far as they were concerned, he was as much an assailant as the 5 men. Laura Solznick protested vehemently and demanded to talk to the female detective in private. The driver didn't hear their conversation. All he knew was that one moment he was bunched along with the attackers, the next he was taken away, while Solznick remained with the detective in her apartment. "I was there to protect her," he told the grim-faced cops in the elevator, and then again when they were on the street. They didn't reply and continued marching him outside to where their vehicle awaited. He heard a commotion from above and glanced up. Laura Solznick had thrust her head outside and was screaming at him. "He's got Bella. I just saw his message on my cell." The 2 cops with him slowed. They looked at one another, and one of them raised his hand to his radio. The driver saw everything as if in slow motion. The cops' lips moving, 3 cruisers at the front, one of which had its driver's side door open. No other cops visible. "That doesn't mean they are there. You'll have to take that risk." He stamped his heel hard on the instep of the cop behind him. A startled groan escaped the police officer. He continued moving, whirling on a heel to strike him in the neck with a bent elbow. He completed the turn and walloped the second cop in the throat with the side of his palm. And then he was away, sprinting towards the open-door cruiser. He threw himself inside it and slammed the door shut. It was boxed between the other 2 cruisers, and now he saw both those vehicles had a cop each in them. One of them was rising out his vehicle, the other was turning at him in surprise and anger. The driver gunned his engine, crashed into the cruiser in front of him, reversed, and took off. He turned on the siren, the light bar already flashing. He had just 1 minute, probably 2, before the NYPD reacted. He hung a left, went on 189th Street, barreled straight down, and crossed St. Nicholas Avenue. The radio on the dash had burst into excited chatter. He paid no attention. He didn't see any pursuers in his mirrors. Not yet. He spotted a parking space to his right, swung into it abruptly, and left running. He leapt over walls, fences, and backyards, and now he could hear cruisers wailing as he backtracked to Solznick's building. He ducked behind a line of cars and peered into her street. As he had suspected, 2 of the cruisers had peeled off. The remaining vehicle had 4 cops in it, while more seemed to be inside the building. He saw more police vehicles approaching in the distance. The neighborhood was filled with the sound of sirens. He turned his jacket inside out, a different color on the outside now. He removed a pair of glasses and wore them. From another pocket, he removed a flesh-looking putty and applied it over his nose. He used the polished door of a car as a mirror and made his nose look bulbous. Pads went inside his mouth and gave him a flabby look. Lastly, he produced a limp mustache and applied it over his lips. Always a limp, straggly mustache, because no one's eyes lingered on one. He set off towards the building and joined a group of curious onlookers. As he suspected, no one paid him much attention. A line of police officers had cordoned off the entrance, and several more had their radios to their ears. He leaned against a car and watched the scene for a moment. "They'll know about my cab." Solznick would have told them. They would have searched the street and come across it. He squinted against the flashing lights. He had guessed right. There was a cop near his cab. He approached the police officer and gave him curious eyes. "What's going on, officer?" The burly cop swung around and looked him up and down. The driver could feel him thinking. Same height and build. The face doesn't match, however. "Where did you come from, sir?" "Apartment 420. That white building. The sirens woke me up." "Some men were harassing a lady. Another man intervened, a cab driver, and he took off with one of our cruisers. Would you believe it?" The driver whistled and then looked down in amazement. "This cab? It's his?" "Yeah." The cop hitched his trousers in disgust at the thought of standing guard over a car. "Need to get the laptop," the driver thought furiously. Why did he flee with a police vehicle? "Beats me," the cop answered sourly. He straightened when a voice called out, "Mahoney? Over here." Mahoney trotted off to join his fellow officers. For a few seconds, no cop was looking in the cab's direction, which gave him enough time to duck low, dart around to the passenger side, unlock the vehicle, and retrieve his equipment. He left the burner phone behind in the cab and shut the door softly. A quick glance ahead. Mahoney was still busy with other cops. A couple of news vans had rolled in and had added to the chaos on the street. Chaos was good. It gave him a window in which to slip away. He ran to the rear of the street, crouching low and staying well beneath the line of sight of the cops. He turned a corner, straightened and slowed to a walk, his backpack over his shoulder. His eyes were moving constantly, seeking a suitably private space, and when he didn't find any, he used a bench. A few eyebrows would be raised if he was spotted, but no one would bother him. This was New York. Anything went in the city, including a solitary figure surfing on a bench late at night. His laptop was still running, but the darknet site had stopped working. It didn't have a Wi-Fi signal. The driver brought out a bunch of burner phones and turned one on. He used the cell phone's network to log onto the site and got it to locate Saunders's cell. Simultaneously, he opened another browser window and went to another website. He used his card to make a payment and got access to Laura Solznick's call records. She had made several calls to his previous phone, almost an equal number of calls to Bella. And then he spotted the incoming call. He checked the number against the one he had for Saunders. It was a different one. He typed in the new number, traced it, and when he got its location, went cold. It was an address in Vinegar Hill, in Brooklyn, a neighborhood that was controlled by the Brooklyn Rats, a gang that had emerged recently. The Rats peddled drugs, but that was only one part of their business. They were into extortion, murder, and people trafficking. Their leader was Brady Darm, an ex-con who had served time for killing a bar dancer with a baseball bat. Darm was rumored to have 50 men in his gang and lived at the Vinegar Hill address. The driver knew, since he had once mounted surveillance on the gang. Why did Saunders go to them? He didn't like the answer he got from himself. There could be only one reason the cop's son had gone to the gang, to get them to kill Bella and dispose of her body. With her disappearance, there would be nothing to link him to the rape. Sure, there was Solznick's report, but it would be her word against his. The camera footage at the club was inconclusive. "Have the police located Saunders?" he messaged Solznick. "Who is this?" came the reply after several minutes. "You know who it is. Are you alone? Surrounded by cops? They are searching for you. Where are you? They are questioning those men. Didn't they check where Saunders is? Don't know. Told them several times. I am scared for Bella. Tell them to check out the Brooklyn Rats in Vinegar Hill. Do they have Bella? Oh my God." The driver didn't reply. He rose from the bench, stuffed everything back into the backpack, and walked quickly down the street. He was looking for an old make of car, one that wouldn't be equipped with low jack or other tracking devices. He found a Ford Taurus, a 10-year-old model, black in color. He kicked its window with his heel and crossed his fingers. No alarm went off. He reached inside and opened the door, and 10 minutes later was driving to Brooklyn. He saw several cruisers on the streets, but none of them slowed when they saw him. He stopped at a midtown building, one that rented out storage space and was open 24 hours to its customers. He keyed in a code at the main entrance and went to a bank of lockers. He opened his and withdrew 2 items. One was a custom-made upper-body armor. He removed his jacket, stripped off his tee, donned the Kevlar, and dressed again. The other item was another backpack from which he brought out a Glock. It felt familiar in his hands. It would. It was his. There was another laptop and more cell phones in the pack. He checked the computer. It was fully charged. He removed his jeans and wore a pair of combat fatigues from the locker and stuffed their pockets with magazines, flashbangs, gloves, and finally strapped a knife to his thigh. He shouldered the backpack and stepped outside. Something stirred inside him and woke up. It roared and raced through his blood. That too was familiar. He called it the Beast. The Beast waking up was a message to the rest of his body. He was ready for war. Chapter 9. He reached Vinegar Hill in quick time, 20 minutes from Midtown. He had blown through several lights, uncaring that he might be spotted by the cops. I want them to chase me and find me at Dahm's location. They'll then find Bella and rescue her. However, not one cruiser pursued or stopped him. He smiled ruefully in the dark. Looks like I'll have to do it myself. Vinegar Hill was dimly lit by streetlights as he drove down Water Street and hung a left to enter Hudson Avenue. He had turned off his lights, and thankfully, the Taurus had a quiet engine. Dahm's building was on the corner of Plymouth Street and Hudson Avenue, a red-bricked building that seemed to have 3 floors. Several windows looked out at the 2 streets, and all rooms were lit. No gangbangers hung outside, but that didn't mean anything. He spotted 2 cameras, one on a lamppost and another on the wall of the building. They've probably spotted my Taurus. He kept on driving till he got to the end of the block and parked the vehicle. He retrieved the storage locker laptop and turned it on. It connected to his cell phone and asked him to enter security credentials. He logged onto a remote server he hadn't used for years, went to a particular folder, and searched for building plans. Dahm's plan came up after a minute. 3 floors, as he had guessed. 3 rooms and a bathroom on each floor. A backyard that was walled. The ground floor had a living room, a kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. She'll be on the 3rd floor, in a bedroom facing the rear. That's where I would keep her. From the backpack, he removed another gadget and pocketed it. Yet another device went into his left hand. He eased out of the Taurus carefully and went to John Street, which was parallel to Plymouth Street, and came up to Dahm's building from the back. He hugged the shadows, and when he was near the rear wall, he turned on the device in his hand. It was an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, emitter. It wasn't a device one purchased at a Radio Shack or at any electronics store. A light on the device pulsed green, and then red. He triggered it again for good measure, left it near the wall, and prayed that the pulse had taken down the security cameras. He brought out the thermal imager, which was insulated from the pulses, and scanned Dahm's stronghold. Several bodies glowed orange. 5 on the 1st floor, 4 on the 2nd, and 5 on the 3rd. One room, facing the backyard on the top floor, had 1 body. It had long hair. I'll be in some trouble if that isn't Bella. He scaled the rear wall, which was just 6 feet high. He didn't drop inside the yard. Instead, he crawled along it and reached the back of the building, where he stood straight, a dark shadow against the brickwork. He peered through a crack in the curtains of the window nearest to him. 3 gangbangers on a couch, staring at a dead TV, one of them fiddling with the remote. They had guns in their waists, beer cans in their hands. A 4th man entered the room. He was as tall as the driver, 6 feet 1 inch, but was heavily built. Muscles rippled on his forearms, and his bald head gleamed under the ceiling lights. He had a bristly red beard, and tats covered every visible inch of flesh except his face. Brady Darm. He too had a gun at his waist. He spoke to one of the men on the couch, who rose and went to the front door. The driver heard it open and froze. If he comes to the rear, he might see me. His Glock slid into his hand. The door closed, and the hood returned to the living room. He shrugged at Darm's questions and scratched his head. Darm asked him to check the cameras. Darm spoke to someone else behind him, and another man emerged from around the corner. He was average height, had dark hair, dark eyes, and was clean-shaven. Chad Saunders! Saunders didn't appear to be nervous. He was wisecracking with Darm and punching him in the shoulder. The rapist dropped onto the couch, opened a beer can, and watched TV like gangbangers would. Why are they awake so late? Saunders probably woke them up when he brought Bella. The driver realized he hadn't asked Solznick when her friend went missing. Why haven't they killed Bella? No sooner had the thought entered his head than he glanced upwards involuntarily. Above his head, about 3 feet away, was the ledge of a window sill. Another room. The next window to it was the room the woman was in. He hoped she was Bella and that she was alive. He walked back on the wall, cautiously, and turned around to face the rear of the house. He took one long step, another, and then leapt in the air, hand and fingers grabbing at the sill, curling around them and holding tight. He willed his body to become light, taught to him many years back by men so old that their skin was like translucent parchment, and that ensured there was barely any noise when his body collided with the wall. He crawled with his hands to the edge of the sill, folding his legs high above the living room's window. He supported his weight with his right hand and reached out with his left. The other sill was just out of reach. He jammed his feet against the wall and, without further thought, launched himself sideways. His left hand found purchase on Bella's windowsill. However, his body slammed with an audible thud. He held his breath and grabbed his Glock with his free hand. He would plug the first gangbanger who poked his head out, but if more of them emerged, it would be game over. No gangster came out to investigate. Through the walls, he heard the sound of canned laughter. The TV's loud. It masked my crash. He let out his breath and hauled himself up to the window. The room was lit from within, but the woman was lying on the bed with her back to him. Her hair appeared dark under the yellow light. Don't know if it's red. He was conscious that his body was outlined against the house. Anyone coming up the street from the rear could see him. He tapped the window urgently. The body on the bed didn't stir. He tried again, harder. No response. Fear settled in the pit of his belly. Did they kill her? He jammed his shoulder against the window and pressed hard. It cracked. Another firm push and it splintered. He used his elbow to knock away shards of glass. Still no movement on the bed. He climbed inside, Glock in left hand, and went to the bed. He was aware anyone could come in through the door. It couldn't be helped. He grabbed her shoulder and turned her around, and sighed in relief. She was fast asleep. No, not asleep, drugged, he concluded, when she stirred but didn't open her eyes when he shook her. That presented a dilemma. Before he could think about it, the door opened. A gangbanger in a sleeveless vest over jeans stepped in. His eyes widened when he took in the driver. His mouth opened when comprehension dawned. And then he was doubling over, grunting deep, as the driver's fist smashed into his throat and the Glock whipped across his temple. The driver dragged him inside and darted his head out. No reaction. The sound of the TV was loud from downstairs and looked like it had covered his blows. Someone will come after him. As if on cue, a voice called out from downstairs. "Bo, what's taking you so long? Is she out, still?" Bo couldn't reply. Bo? The driver removed 2 flashbangs from his pocket and wore custom-made shades and a pair of mufflers over his ears. He thought he heard the couch creak, and then he heard steps on the stairs. 1 pair. There was movement from the room next to Bella's. A head appeared, looked at him. What? He threw the 2 flashbangs, one in the hallway and one right at the approaching thug. He ducked back into the room as the explosions sounded in the house and white light burst into the room from underneath the door. He pulled out another cell phone, dialed Laura Solznik's number from memory, and dropped the phone back into his pocket and kept the line open. Hello? He heard her voice. No time to reply. He turned off the light in his room, threw himself to the floor, and flinging open the door, threw 2 more flashbangs, and followed it up with 2 tear gas grenades. He turned his head away when the explosions sounded, drowning out the sound of yells and shouts and pounding feet. He crawled fast, and when the first body tottered through the smoke, fired. The body dropped. Another one appeared. That too dropped when his gun roared. Someone fired a gun, its round lost somewhere in the house. No one climbing the steps yet. He came to the bedroom next to Bella's. 2 gangbangers, dazed, one on the bed, one on the floor. He shot them in the head, 4 down. 3rd floor cleared. He blinked rapidly to stop his eyes from tearing up. The shades fitted on his face like a seal, protecting his eyes, but they weren't perfect. He got an idea. He rose to his feet and heaved 1 gangbanger over the banisters. The body went crashing. Now he could hear Dom yelling, organizing his men. Time to change that. He dropped another body down and hurled 2 grenades below. "Watch out!" a voice screamed, and then the house rocked in explosions. He ran back to Bella's room. She was awake, but her eyes were unfocused, her head moving from side to side. He lifted her and laid her on the floor. Removed the mattress from the bed and threw it out of the window. He lifted the unconscious Hood and with a great deal of effort shoved him out of the window. "Backyard! They're getting away from the rear!" Dom, hoarse, anger and panic in his voice. The driver grabbed Bella and pushed her under the bed. "Stay," he told her fiercely. Didn't wait to see if she understood. "What's going on?" a female voice shouted. He wondered where it came from, and then remembered the open line to Solznik. "Bella's here, alive. Get the cops to track this number." He spoke softly, and then stepped out into the hallway, his Glock pointing straight ahead. Chapter 10. "It's not her. It's Bo," a voice sounded from outside. "They're still upstairs. Get them," Dom replied roughly. That ruse didn't work, the driver thought. He looked down, a head peering up. He snapped a shot quickly and missed. The flashbang he threw didn't miss. It exploded, its flash dimmed by his goggles, and he went down fast, triggering as quickly as he could. Anyone and everyone was hostile. He saw a shape. He fired. Quick mag change with his left hand, 2 seconds to slap a new one. He was going down. The Hoods were coming up. He had the advantage of elevation, and that was the only one he had. They had numbers on their side, even if many of them were dead or dazed. "I just need to live long enough for the cops to come." Another thug came yelling through the smoke, spittle flying off his mouth, his AR-15 blowing holes in the wall. The driver dropped himself on the stairs and brought the gangbanger down with a 1-2. He grabbed the rifle and went on the 2nd floor's hallway, let loose with it in a room, with just the barrel pointing inside. Holes appeared in the wall, waist-high, as shooters fired from inside, the rounds flying off safely above him. The rifle clicked on empty. He threw it away, decided to take a look around the door to the room. 4 hitters sprawled out. 2 of them badly bleeding, one dead, another affected by the flashbangs. They had been playing games on a console when the shooting had started. All 4 of them, in one room. It looked like some luck was going his way. 10 minutes out, he heard a voice on his cell. It was strong and calm. A cop's voice. "Gotta live that long." He heard whispering on the ground floor and murmuring. 5 men below, including Darm and Saunders, assuming all were alive. They will be. All the damage was on the 2nd and 3rd floor. A cool breeze swept past his face, drawing his attention to the open window that faced the backyard. It gave him an idea. He had 2 more flashbangs and tear gas grenades. He tossed them down the stairs and then ran back to the window and dropped as the weapons exploded inside. His fingers caught the sill and stopped his descent. He angled his body away from the living room's window and landed lightly on grass. "Who are you, dude?" a voice asked him softly. He dove sideways, too slow to react as something kicked him in the chest. Another round hit him, and he lost his guns. Then Darm stood over him, a handgun gripped lightly in his right hand. The gang boss caught him by the collar and raised him easily as if he weighed nothing. "You aren't wounded? Armor?" he muttered in amazement, and then the driver acted. He brought his knee up in a wicked move and caught Darm in the belly. A grunt escaped the attacker, and his grip loosened. The driver brought his hands together and clapped Darm on his ears, and this time the gang boss moaned in agony and let go. He wasn't done, though. He came at the driver, gun coming up. His finger tightened on the trigger. The driver let himself collapse just in time as the round creased the top of his head. He punched a wicked blow at Darm's abdomen, using his knuckles, and then fell sideways when the man kneed him in the shoulder. He crawled away quickly and rose as soon as there was a safe distance between him and Darm. "He's mine," the gang boss cautioned 2 hitters who had come outside. "Go check on the girl." The driver snapped a glance and spotted Saunders in the living room, watching them with a terrified expression on his face. 3 minutes, came the voice on his cell. "Who's that?" Darm frowned. The driver attacked instead of replying, going in fast, feinting to his right, and when the gang boss parried, striking with his left hand. Darm's shoulder felt like concrete when his blow connected, and the man laughed insolently. He swatted the driver away lazily with a right fist and followed through with a barrage of blows that landed on the driver's face and belly. "Load her in the car!" he threw back over his shoulder to his men, "while I deal with this piece of—" The driver struck him in the throat, and when Darm punched weakly, ducked underneath, grabbed the outstretched arm, and twisted it. The driver was hurting. His body was short of air. The gang boss's blows seemed to have broken a couple of ribs, even through the armor, but he wasn't going down without a fight. Problem was, he was no match for Darm's physicality. With a roar that could have been heard in the entire neighborhood, the gangster shrugged him away, grabbed him with both hands, and flung him against the wall. The driver's breath left in a whoosh, and he slid down in a daze. He saw Darm approaching, as if from underwater, something shining in the man's hand. A shard of glass. The beast roared. Not like this, not by his hands, it howled. Darm leaned over him, pinning him down with his left hand, bringing up the sliver to pierce him through the throat. The driver held his eyes and twisted his body at the last minute to take the glass over his left shoulder. It burned, and white heat raced through him. The beast swallowed it and flew down his arms, raising them, powering them, turning the right fist into a spear with just its knuckles showing. And with Darm still leaning over him, the driver struck him in the throat. His knuckles found the right spot, crushed the gangster's Adam's apple, and choked the breath out of him. Darm staggered, and the driver struck him in the same spot, in the same way. Nothing existed for the driver but for Darm and his eyes, which were now filling with fear. The driver's knuckled fist came opened, and the heel of his palm smashed into the attacker's nose. Darm's howl matched the beast's roar. The driver curled his hand again. "Kill him," the beast urged him. "End it." The knuckles pointed again, and this time they would rip open the hostile's throat. His fists swung. "Stop! No!" The second voice was female, and through the red mist filling him, the driver recognized Laura Solznik's voice. He stopped and kicked Darm away with a leg. Cops helped him up, and when he had his breathing under control, and when the beast had disappeared into his bloodstream, he looked around. Police officers everywhere that he could see. Some of them surrounding Chad Saunders, 2 of them helping medics carry Bella outside. Someone offered him a bottle of water, while another medic came to him and inspected his wounds. "Your phone," the female medic pointed to his pocket. "It's turned on." He remembered. He brought it out, looked at the scene around him, and then sent a text to a number he thought he would never use. That of a woman, Claire. "Need your help." The reply came back promptly. "I know. I'm following it on TV. My name shouldn't surface. I'll take care of it." He kept stubbornly quiet when the cops started questioning him. Solznik came over despite a few officers protesting and stared at him in bewilderment. "Just tell them what happened. Say something. You're not in any trouble." He drank from the bottle of water in reply. A couple of detectives frowned. They conferred with themselves, and then the calls came in. The 2 detectives slapped their hands to their waists and pockets and removed their cells. They turned away from him, and from their stiffening, he knew it wasn't news that they liked. "But, sir," one detective protested, and then fell quiet. "I don't understand," the other was saying. They both clammed up when the voices over their phones gave them instructions. "Okay," they said finally. They turned, looked at each other, and shrugged. One of them looked at the medic. "Is he okay?" "Yeah, some cuts and wounds, which I have dressed up." "You're free to go," the detective told the driver. A stunned silence fell in the backyard. An elderly police officer sidled next to the detectives. "Sir, there are bodies in the house, signs of military-grade weapons. We should at least take his statement." "No one talks to him. He walks." No one stopped the driver as he walked through the house and out of its front door. He stood for a moment breathing in the night air, and when the first of the news vans rolled in, bent his head and started walking away. "Wait!" Laura Solznik came hurrying up. She looked at him searchingly. "What happened back there?" "Don't know, ma'am. Looks like they had a change of heart." "You... 1 man... so much damage," she fumbled. "I got lucky, ma'am." "Where did you get those weapons?" "Found them in a car I stole, ma'am." She pressed her lips tight and regarded him, and then a slow smile spread over her face and lit her eyes. "You're not really a cab driver, are you?" "I drive one now, ma'am." "Will my brother know of you?" "No, ma'am." "Who are you? That's not your real name on that license, is it?" He glanced at the cops hurrying in and out of the house, at the detectives answering reporters' questions. "No, ma'am, it isn't." "Will you tell me?" "No, ma'am." "Will I see you again?" "No, ma'am." And with that, Zeb Carter walked away into the darkness. The end.